Good morning, church. It's Pastor Jennifer. Thanks for logging on and finding today's daily word. I'm glad to meet you here in this space, and I'm thankful for the time that you set aside to begin your day this way. As we wrap up this worship series that was influenced by a few books that your pastors found meaningful and helpful in our faith and theology, we've been discussing the ways that things can influence our theology, like books and music, people, and this week we're talking about places that have influenced our theology. And today I want to tell you about a place that was significant to my understanding of faith, and it shaped my theology, and even more so, it shaped my understanding of ecclesiology, which is a beautiful fancy word for what it means to be church. And that place is London and some surrounding areas. Back in 2003, when I was in college, I was involved in campus ministry, and I had visited London once before, or more broadly England, on a choir tour. But in 2003, I spent a longer period of time there and started that trip with a campus ministry group that was on a Wesley tour. And so we saw all the typical sites, pointing out elements of our faith and how John Wesley started his movement that eventually became, in part, what we know as the United Methodist Church, of which we are a part, and also saw some other significant places. I actually stayed on longer for that trip and so experienced even more of that place. And so I want to share some of that story with you today. Within that trip, a couple of places were very significant. And so in my understanding of what it means to be the church, viewing the places where John Wesley first preached, like Bristol, and visiting the new room, which I understand has been renovated and is even more of a wonderful experience now. Perhaps we can someday, when this pandemic is over, take a church trip to visit that and get a deeper understanding of how our tradition started. I gained a sense of this thing called the Wesleyan tradition and how it was distinctive and different from other faith expressions, and in very good ways. I also visited the city of Coventry on that first part of the trip, and a very powerful location and experience on that part of the trip was seeing Coventry Cathedral, which is not a Methodist building, but is a very well-known location. It was heavily bombed during World War II, and it's a hugely impacting experience to go there because they kept the shell of the old cathedral that's just bombed out and hollowed out. And when they went to rebuild the cathedral, they integrated that old architecture into the new in a really beautiful, really innovative way. And they kept that old destroyed building up, the walls. It's open to the sky, and erected a really beautiful statue about reconciliation. And so just as in those Wesleyan sites, I gained a sense of tradition. When I visited Coventry, I gained a sense of the call for the church to be a witness to the world, especially when historic events unfold and we experience evil and tragedy. The church can bear witness to God's presence and the power of grace to the world. And Coventry Cathedral is a wonderful example of that. You can look up images of Coventry Cathedral, and I encourage you to visit their webpage. They tell more of their story in a way far better than I can on today's Daily Word. I spent most of my time on that trip in London. I stayed on for close to 2 months. There, right in the middle of London, and stayed in some student housing and engaged in some work. I was an intern with the West London Mission, mostly staying involved at their headquarters on Hines Street, which is in Marylebone, if you're familiar with London. And there I did a couple of things. Each morning I helped serve breakfast, and the West London Mission is largely in existence to provide services and resources and support for people experiencing homelessness. And so part of that is they have a wonderful day center on Hines Street where people can come in and receive hot meals, they can take a shower, they can wash their laundry, they can store their belongings there so they don't have to have them with them on the street every day. And so at that day center every morning, I began my day by serving a full English breakfast to anyone who came through. There's a small charge for it, but it was very affordable for the people who needed that breakfast, and was on the regular chided for saying tomato instead of tomato. In the evenings, once a week at the West London Mission, they had programming for people who mostly lived on the street to come in. They served tea and cookies, and it was a social gathering for them where they could connect with one another in a safe space, and where also they could just have conversation with people who were not experiencing homelessness. They also had some faith and art projects and programming that they could engage in if they chose to. But it was mostly just a safe space where people gathered around a table. They could have a conversation with someone who was safe and friendly and cared, and who could remind them in appropriate and approachable ways of the love and support of God. And so I not only learned how to make good tea and serve it faithfully to the British population, but I just learned that the church is meant to serve as well. And so that experience of being in Britain for a couple of months, many, many summers ago, really shaped my understanding of what the church is and what it is called to be. How it is called to carry forth tradition and innovate, as John Wesley did, and how it is called to witness to the world, and also how it is called to serve in the world. And so I encourage you to think about a place that was formative for you in your understanding of the faith. It might be somewhere nearby, or it might be somewhere across an ocean. And to share that with somebody, or to send an email or leave a message and comment below about those places. It is a blessing, I think, that God has made this world in all its diversity and all its complexity, but in a way that is always pointing us towards God and towards our calling to serve faithfully as disciples. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Blessings.